Hi, I'm Laura,
Hi, I'm Deanne.
And I'm Philippe.
and welcome to our Lymond Book Club, where we are reading Checkmate by Dorothy Dunnett. And today we are going to talk about part 3, chapters 4, 5, and 6. I'll lead the discussion. Any initial thoughts, Dee and Philippe, that you want to share before we dive in?
I really like these chapters. They were nice. I don't know. It could be that I'm not as tired as I was last time. Last time I was totally exhausted and probably kind of grumpy. But yeah, I really enjoyed reading these. It was nice.
They were pleasantly perfect.
That was the best part, by far.
That was good.
I don't know what else to say in the beginning. I feel like we'd probably just go through. But I liked this is a shorter section than usual. But it's the way we have this section split up. So
Yeah, I figure we should just do 3, 3, and 3 since there's 9 chapters in part 3.
mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's pretty short. Maybe we can breeze through it.
Well, probably not, but
We say that all the time, like, oh, we're not gonna have very much to say about this section, and then 2.5 hours later
we shall see. Okay, so chapter 4. I'll just summarize the whole chapter quickly, and then we can dive in. So we start out with Adam meeting up with Philippa, who has gotten a bad cold after the stressful night with Lymond and Jared and Marta, etc. He tells her that Lymond went off to Dieppe, and that Lymond thinks Richard and Sibylla are dead, but don't worry, they're not. He encourages Philippa to go, which she doesn't want to do. But they brainstorm on how to help him, and they conclude there are 2 ways. One, to uncover the genuine truth behind whatever happened with Sibylla, and 2, he needs to lift the strain, the implication being through sex with Catherine's mother. Okay. We do have a milestone, which is that Philippa calls Lymond Francis in conversation with Adam, which we heard she did once before, and obviously it's still quite a thing. She then visits Nostradamus to ask for his help to find the house that the key opens, this key from the Dame de Dutantes. And he does a ritual to ask the angel Anael, who tells them Claris and Clarassi. And if you take out the extra L's, which are apparently there as part of the language locked in L thing continuing, we end up with it's a house in Paris. Cerasi, which is Latin for cherry, and there's a street called Rue de la Cerese, which is like Cherry Street. And so the indication from the angel Anael is that the key opens a door to a house on Cherry Street in Paris. He also gives Nostradamus also gives Philippa some romantic advice. He figures out that she's in love with someone and says he will not come to you. You must feed your heart to him, basically, and advises her to ask Lymond the truth of the night in Lyon when he met Nostradamus, which we know, but she doesn't, is the night that he tried to kill himself. All right, let's dive in.
Okay. I kind of love that we get this opening bit of advice from Gideon about avoiding claret if your name begins with a letter of the alphabet. It's just like, oh, dad advice.
And I love that we're in Philippa's point of view. So, of course, she's thinking about stuff her dad said.
Yeah, that's nice.
I guess claret was like the grog of the day, like the cheap stuff that gets you really hungover and headachy the next day.
Yeah, I have no idea. It's some kind of alcohol that you drink. I'm surprised though, because maybe not. For some reason in my head, it's one of the alcohols that women drink in like 19th century novels, which would mean it was less alcoholic, but I could be wrong about that. I do love Adam's insight into Francis, which was 100% true, where he says, if he's tired and they put a foot wrong, he will choose the one unmentionable response and make it. And it's just like, oh yeah. That's what happened. So
Adam knows him very, very well. I also like the compassion in Philippa's thought, because Lymond was such an ass, but she's thinking about the condition he was in, being no better than hers, and how he'd taken, to the road with that terrible news, and feeling bad for what he's going through rather than just being angry at him for being a mess. Philippa and her compassion.
I enjoy that Philippa is now comfortable enough to call Lymond Francis in front of other people, but in her head, she keeps correcting herself to say Mr. Crawford instead of Francis, because she's trying to get away from him. She's trying to sort of escape, her feelings for him and such.
Yeah, I feel like she's trying to keep her distance, because the more she lets herself think of him as Francis, the harder it is. It's the more painful it is knowing that she can't have him.
Yeah, and these chapters are definitely full of a lot of that, of Philippa being sad and can't have him.
Yeah, I could never have him. I'm gonna be happy for Catherine, but I'm really sad.
Yeah.
Who wants to be happy for Catherine? Go away. We don't want you here.
Oh, it's not her fault.
I understand.
Perfectly nice.
I know. I wish she had stuck to her guns and said, I despise Lymond. That was bound to never happen, so.
When he turned the charm on her, like, how could she resist?
I found it so interesting that Adam said, Philippa asked him, you don't object to throwing Mr. Crawford and myself together. And Adam's reply is, I know your upbringing and I know something else. Francis has his divorce and his freedom. Also interesting that Adam's calling him Francis to Philippa as well. Francis has his divorce and his freedom in prospect, but the headaches have come back. So clearly he's saying, like, his stress is still there, even though this divorce is in sight, his freedom is in sight, but he's still completely stressed out. Archie was worried last night. Philippa, this family business has to be laid bare and thrashed out with Philippa, not before Richard in a storm of stripped nerves, but with Sibylla in calm and in privacy. And I was just like, I was like, yes. Oh my gosh.
Too late.
Yeah. They know exactly what to be worried about. I do like Philippa's, I trust his ultimate good sense more than you do. Richard will never hear of Marta through him. Yeah. Do we think that's true?
I don't think it's true that Richard will never hear of Marta. I think obviously that piece of information is going to come to Richard.
But through Lymond. I
can see if there's a point where Lymond is like weakened by an injury, or he's super drunk, or somewhere his judgment is impaired. He might lash out in that way, but I don't see him like thoughtfully telling Richard ever.
As much as Richard tries to hurt him, and Lymond in that scene pulls out all the stops to hurt Sibylla, Philippa certainly seems to believe that he has a boundary he won't cross in hurting Richard with the Marta news.
I don't know. I mean, he didn't cross him in that scene. Like, he didn't, even though Sibylla knew what he was talking about, Richard didn't know. Like, and he didn't betray it to Richard, like, explicitly.
So. Which actually makes a lot of sense, because all his anger is at Sibylla. It's not Richard.
Yeah.
I think he thinks Richard is just a victim in sort of, he has no knowledge of any of Sibylla's, what Lymond's think is her treachery. So he wants to keep Sibylla whole in Richard's mind.
Yeah, and it's just really interesting how Richard keeps hurting him, and Lymond just keeps thinking of Richard as, his loving brother, that it's all his fault that he's pushed him too far, and never blaming Richard, even though we can be like, come on, Richard, you're certainly not perfect either.
Yeah. Richard has some responsibility here, for sure.
We also have a bit of talk about the reveal about Austin. It was unfortunate that he heard and saw what he did, but he knows now where he stands and he'll respect you nonetheless. And then we have much more follow up on that a couple chapters later. And then we have, but it, I mean, I love how insightful Adam is. He really gets things. And then we have Philippa thinking that to refuse Adam's request that she go to Dieppe had been, she supposed, the hardest thing she had ever done in her life.
Harder than being in the seraglio of the Sultan of Turkey.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, like she desperately wants to go comfort him, but knows that it will be like, in some ways I think the seraglio was to be endured. You know, she wasn't making choices there. She was enduring something horrible. Whereas here she's actively choosing not to do something that she desperately wants to do.
Yeah, I think because she's made some hard choices. Like she chose to go into the seraglio in order to see Kazum.
It wasn't a very hard choice for her to do it, though. She kind of just ran headlong first into it.
Here, it's not just going to Dieppe; it's keeping herself away from the one she loves when he needs her.
Yeah.
How does Nostradamus know that she's in love? His whole, this white fire which lives without fuel. Bring me a lock of his hair, and I will make you a love potion so powerful. Blah blah blah.
Wait, where are you?
350. Nostradamus and Philippa.
Wait. We got to talk about them talking about Francis needs to have sex. Like,
God, yeah.
Like, what?
You guys talk about that. I hate that, but you guys.
Yeah, like we're having this discussion about how insightful Adam is about Lymond, and he's like, yeah, the other thing he needs is someone to sleep with, and Philippa's like, sure. And it should be, he doesn't seem to be seducing Catherine, so like, what? Yeah, I thought that was odd.
I don't know if that's ever really helped him get over stress in the past, considering how transactional sex has always been to him.
Yeah.
It helped him with a headache one time. Like he slept with a prostitute in Ringed Castle, one of the ones that Nipeja had around, like to ward off the headache. But it does seem like the same diagnosis Jarrett gave when he found him at the fountain, right? I don't know how. Like, I have never seen a person in a state of stress where I was like, wow, I can tell just by looking at you that you need to get laid, like medically.
Yeah, it's so weird. Oh, yeah. But then I think Adam goes back a little bit to being insightful again after this weird episode where she asked him, does he think that Austin would suit her or that she would suit Austin? And he says, Philippa, I can't think of anyone you wouldn't suit. It depends what in return they can offer. And I think that's another way that he does see her, that she could make it work with, you can see Philippa making it work with whoever she ends up with. But what they bring to her is the ultimate question.
So many progressive men to balance out our douchebag John Knox that we read about later.
Yeah. Okay, so the love potion you were saying?
Oh, it just amuses me that Nostradamus offers her a love potion and then he gives her the face cream with the
with mercury in it.
Oh my god.
Which I'm like, as soon as I read that, I was just like, no, stay away. I mean, obviously it was a common ingredient, but oh my god.
The saliva of a young person who for 3 days has eaten onions without vinegar.
Yum.
But what also cracks me up about this is like all these anti-aging. Like we have the exact same things now. It's not any different. I mean, hopefully they don't have mercury in them now.
Yeah, there's no crossover. But yeah, or arsenic.
But it's not that far removed from alchemy, honestly.
Yeah.
This second half of this chapter brings up the same question I've sort of not struggled with, but anytime there's anything supernatural that's happening, I have to wonder if it's really going into the realm of the supernatural or if there's something else going on here. Like, does Nostradamus already know where this house is? And like he set up his little device to make those words specific. I mean, that would take a lot of work, I think. But like, I don't know if I want the supernatural to be a part of this book series or not. I can accept it in little bits, but it's just, it just feels out of place to me.
It's kind of like the Ouija board thing, where like, I would say most of the time, like the people who are holding the little thing on the Ouija board are who's spelling out whatever, consciously or unconsciously, like that's who's doing it, you know? And this whole spelling out the thing is.
I mean, I think this one is plausible deniability from Dunnett, that it could just be that Nostradamus knew the Dame de Dutance and knew the house and is giving the information to Philippe that way. And there's definitely things he does where he's like reading her thoughts that are things that fortune tellers do now, you know, giving you a sudden look, knowing that you're skeptical, that are just, they're just tricks. Like it's not real mind reading. Like I don't think he does anything totally unexplainable here.
Well, it's not like he gives any prophecies or anything like that. It's just the device. Both times they tried again and it spells out the exact same letters. And I'm assuming it's just like some kind of counterweight that he like swings and it touches letters around a bowl. So there's no way to really control that unless there is, and I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sure there is. I mean, it's like all kinds of magic tricks, you know.
But if he was controlling it, that would mean that he would have to have known about the whole languish locked in L thing, because that L is in there for specifically that reason. Or else why would he have just dropped a random L into both words?
I mean, it could be coincidence, and then she comes up with an explanation for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Honestly, and there's a huge part of me that like it doesn't matter to me.
It doesn't matter. You're right.
You know, like if it's you know, supernatural or not supernatural, I sort of don't care. But I can see Nostradamus, at least as he's written in this book, like it not being supernatural, but him being super dramatic about it. And like, what's the most dramatic way that I can give this information and make myself look the most mysterious? Like that does seem.
Yeah.
It's also just really good flavoring of the 16th century. You know?
Yeah. True. I guess for me, it feels like finding out the information about the hotel in this way is a little bit too much Deus Ex Machina. Like it comes out of nowhere and like it just feels a little slight for me. But I'm willing to accept it and move on. That's okay. Yeah. But literally, an angel tells them that is the machine of the gods right there. So.
Yeah, but I definitely think though you can trace it back to like the seed has always been there, at least from book 2 with the Dame de Dutance reading Lymond's mind, and also just with her doing her supernatural stuff. So even if you just read it as he knew her and he's using the same tricks as her, that's been a thread from Queen's Play. So this one doesn't bother me as much because it has a logical reason. It's more the ones that have no logical reason that I'm a little bit like eye rolling at.
Also, narratively, I actually think it's a good choice because, like, we could spend a chapter running around and talking to people and figuring out, like, oh, the house is on Cherry Street, you know, and she follows this clue and follows that clue and then, like, knocks on every door and opens, you know, tries the lock and convinces people to let her in and blah, blah, blah. I'm just like, that would just be a whole wasted chapter. Like, just give her the information and go to the house. So.
And you're right, I do like this chapter. I do like bringing Nostradamus into it. I even said the last time he was around, we don't get any kind of prophecy. So like we do actually spend the extra time with him here that I was looking for. The last time he only had like a paragraph, but.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier about this, where he's talking about the person she's in love with and gives her advice. And he says, like, here you have a hawk of the lure, not of the fist. He will not come to you. If you would have him, you must lay your heart upon your hawking glove and feed it to him. And just that idea that what would bring Lymond to her is the absolute true knowledge of her heart, and which she has not given him, you know. And I think that's an interesting, like, he saw a little bit that she was in love with him, but he doesn't think it's like real or lasting or any of that. And so it's interesting, like, if she had said to Lymond what she said to Austen later, I wonder what would happen.
Well, and the words he uses is they're very feed it to him. Like it's not necessarily just like offer it to him or show it to him or reveal it to him. It's like give it to him to devour. It's bloody and it implies like injury to her.
I mean, you cannot give someone else your heart and keep it yourself, if you're talking about the physical one.
Unless you're Doctor Who and have two hearts.
Yeah, that's true.
Wrong book.
I forgot about that.
He could show up. I mean,
I super also cracked up at the end when Nostradamus says, "I will pray for you," or "I pray for you," and Philippa's response is, "Not to Anael, I beg you. He would send us to purgatory."
Yeah. Yeah.
He does kind of give a prophecy also. He says, "Time, La Boiteau, the lame one, will release you both."
I mean, that's more like a platitude.
Time heals
Everything will be fine in time.
Let's see.
Time heals all wounds.
It's not super specific.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you're right. It is a prophecy of sort.
Yeah, and he does, of course, tell her that bit, like you said earlier, about the night he spent with Nostradamus, and that she says, "I know where he spent the night." He's like, he says, "You think you do." So she's not going to forget that.
Yeah. Why does Nostradamus tell her that? And what do you think is going to come of it? What's going to happen?
I mean, for some reason, he seems to be slightly invested in their relationship, which I'm not quite sure why. But maybe he's Elizabeth's man, right? He's. Oh no, that's John Dee.
Yeah, that's John
Yeah,
Dee.
that's John Dee. I have no idea. Why would he want Philippa in? Anyway, he seems slightly invested in their relationship. And so if she has this little thing to latch onto, like, here's the thing that you don't know and you should know it, maybe it will lead to an actual discussion between the two of them. Who knows?
Perhaps he's invested in the threads of fate and making sure that they come together the right way.
Yeah.
I also like how Philippa doesn't necessarily call him out, but kind of lets him know, it's like, oh, the tricks that you've been using on me, it's like the same exact stuff that we did in the Seraglio. Like, I learned all of these things. And he's just kind of silent for a moment. So it's like, I'm onto you. Like, I know what you're doing here.
Yeah, I think it's entertaining, and it's interesting because, like, between the different fortune tellers we've had Johnny Bolo, Dame de Dutance, John Dee, those are the main ones, and Nostradamus. Johnny Bolo was just totally full of crap. Nothing he said was real. Dame de Dutance and John Dee both seemed pretty like serious business, take them seriously. And then we go back to Nostradamus, who's like kind of a combination of the two. Like, she both calls him out on his crap, like just like Sibylla did with Johnny Bolo, but at the same time there's a part in this where suddenly he doesn't seem funny at all and she takes it very seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And he's also kind of the one who's lasted throughout the ages. Like, you know, he's sort of super famous as this like prophecy guy today. I mean, I think he's famous in kind of a way people don't actually know what he did, but they've heard the name, you know, but he's the one who's lasted, which is interesting.
Yeah, he's somehow like hooked into the conspiracy theorists throughout the centuries. Everybody can read something into his prophecies.
Well, when you make a million prophecies, one or two of them are going to happen in time eventually.
Well, and there's all kinds of studies about like how he did it and how they're vague enough to be interpreted in different ways, but they use like certain words or certain concepts that were resonant at that time and in other times. Any other thoughts on chapter 4? Okay, chapter 5, we're back to Lymond. So he wakes up in the home of Aline Bouchard, who is a draper's widow. First, he wakes up and is still really sick, and Archie comes and gives him his medicine. Sleeps for a long time, wakes up again, talks to Martine, who we will remember as his prostitute friend that helped him in Queen's Play. And she had basically seen him, realized he was ill, and had him brought to the house, or sent to James Stewart to get him or whatever. And she also realizes he's in love and is the third person to give this "you need to get laid" diagnosis. He then meets with Erskine of Dun and James Stewart, which is the bastard brother of Mary Queen of Scots by her father, the previous Scottish king. And Lymond pulls a complete Scarlet Pimpernel here, playing a foppish fool as he talks to these guys. And they basically give us an overview of the political situation, which is like the French have been in Scotland for a while and they're Catholic, and the Scottish are increasingly threatened by this French presence and this feeling like they're just becoming like a province of France. And so they're coalescing around Calvinism, and sort of like the Scottish native powers with Calvinism going then against the French who are Catholic. And so that's how the political situation is coming, which sort of, by the way, means that once Elizabeth is Queen of England, England goes from being Catholic to Protestant, then it's much more likely to ally with Scotland. But basically, they want Lymond to join up with the Calvinist side to help them kick out the French and be powerful in Scotland. Or not actually kick out the French, but put in place a powerful regent who's a Calvinist, Scottish guy. Lymond says no, he's going to go back to Russia, or maybe he's going to marry Catherine, in which case he'd be allied with the French Catholics, but he's totally not going back to Scotland. Although they do reveal that Richard has allied himself with the Calvinists. And Lymond does say he'll go back if Richard dies, but he implies that it's only as a power grab because he's still playing this role. And then we end at the very end with him chatting with Archie, and I think the main thing is that he agrees he's going to keep Richard from finding out about Marta. Okay, sorry for the long summary. It's a lot to try to coalesce all the politics stuff down.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, there was a big politics section in the middle of this, but funny because of Lymond's, saying the Scarlet Pimpernel is like the perfect illusion for this. And of course, Erskine and Stewart's reaction to Lymond's like excessive foppishness is funny. So, this is, I think, one of those things you were saying about having a light touch with the politics. Like, there was a lot of politics in this chapter, but it was also mixed in with this really funny play acting and response, and like the emotional response of these two men. And so it didn't feel too. It didn't seem too overwhelming.
Yeah, I had not read or seen the Scarlet Pimpernel until like last year, I think, during the pandemic.
Which one did you watch?
I watched is Leslie Howard's name?
Oh yeah, you should watch the Richard E. Grant one. The Leslie Howard one's good, but I love Richard E. Grant as
I downloaded that one. I didn't watch it yet, but I watched the Leslie Howard one because that's the one Dunnett had seen.
Yeah.
And she, I believe, has actually said that the Leslie Howard Scarlet Pimpernel was one of the influences.
Oh yeah.
And as soon as I saw the movie, I was like, oh my God, this scene is her like tribute to that movie.
I've only ever seen the musical, so.
It's such a good story. There's also a 1980s miniseries with Jane Seymour that I think I have a digital copy of somewhere.
See, I think my other problem with that movie was that I was completely with the French Revolutionists, and I was like, screw the monarchy, man. I hate this guy. Which is a whole other thing.
He's such a good character.
He's a great character, though. Yes, I'm like, okay, I disagree with the politics of the writer, but within the like construct of the story, this is a really fun character.
Oh.
All right.
Yeah, I also, there was this little melancholy bit at the beginning. Well, first of all, it was nice. Like, there's this bit about how his relationship with Martine is one less of commerce than a friendship. Although there's still a little bit of commerce because they keep talking about like giving her fabric for this. But at the end of this next page, he's talking about recovering from the episode that he'd had, and he says, someday he supposed the faculties by which he lived would not all return to him. It would put a convenient term on many things, and in the meantime, he saw no reason to dwell on it. And so just like there's this doom sort of hanging over him that one day he's going to wake up and be permanently blind, or, you know, permanently dizzy or something like that, and he's not going to be able to recover and be himself. And
which I sort of think influences his like ambivalence about he's not as adamant about going back to Russia now. He's sort of playing this French side, but I think it's like through this morbid reason of like, I'm not gonna be like functional anyway, so what does it matter?
And possibly, you know, if he's still telling himself that his reason for going back to Russia is to help Russia and to become this, you know, this figure that he was in Russia before again, if he doesn't think he'll be able to do it, then
right, yeah, it's gonna be hard to convince Ivan the Terrible and unseat Vishnevetsky and blah 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 when he's like collapsing from headaches. I also just really love Archie in this because Archie is very you know, he's so unsentimental, but he's also so caring. And there's kind of a lovely moment where he's like, you must be getting soft as sapples. You can open your eyes. And then after a moment, he said, put your hands back if it helps. You've got a bit to go yet. I'll mix you something. So like the way he's very unsentimental and blunt in how he communicates, but how his actual actions are extremely attuned to what Lymond is feeling and very caring. And it's also, I think, probably targeted to the fact that I mean, one, it's his personality, but two, Lymond is not going to allow himself to be taken care of by someone who's really like expressing lots of care for him. So it's the fact that Archie keeps his distance and acts like he doesn't care that lets him allows Lymond to let him in, you know, and actually lets
which
him.
Archie is well aware of, I'm sure.
Yeah.
That's how it works.
Yeah. That was good.
I love the whole transactional sort of relationship where Martine keeps giving Lymond more information and he keeps buying her more reams of cloth. She's like, I'll have the velvet also. Very well.
And I think it's interesting because it's like they're on the same page about each other. You know, it is transactional, but it's not predatory.
Right.
Was Martine a former partner? Did he actually use her services in Queensland?
It says briefly that she used to be in charge of the former king's permanent mistresses. So it sounds like she was a madam of like a house where the women that the current king's father slept with on a regular basis lived. So she would have had a lot of power or at least some power in previous years, it seems like. And I did read that they had been intimate. Like, it seems like that. I don't know if it explicitly said that, but
If you go back and read their scene in Queensway, they definitely had sex.
I mean, she greets him by kissing him on the mouth, which
Yeah. But then she says, I'll not do that again, because she sees almost immediately that, no, you finally found the right woman. After all this time.
It's just really interesting that she's that intuitive and yet I don't know. I mean, she's also just a professional. They're both professionals and communicating in a professional way. And I mean, he's got this way with prostitutes because I think because he thinks of himself as a prostitute, where he's like one of them and just like very on the same page and feels like very equal with them, and they can communicate in this very equal way, which is like in some ways healthy, but it's never like passionate or anything like that.
well, and he treats them like people as opposed to objects, and so they're probably just not used to an upper class man treating them with respect, and so it makes a difference. What did you think of this writer guy? Like, are we supposed to know who the writer is? Like, obviously he's anti queens, like anti women in charge. Are we supposed to know who it was?
Okay, so yeah, I looked it up because we're doing book club, and so I looked it up. So this screed, this misogynist screed against women in power, is written by John Knox, who was the leader of, or one of like the religious fanatics pushing for Calvinism in Scotland.
Yeah.
So the implication is that Knox has been staying here with the prostitutes while writing his misogynist screed, I guess.
I mean,
was he Scottish or French?
He was Scottish.
So he's probably in the retinue with the other two.
I think so. There's a whole section.
The fact that men can hate women and also use prostitutes seems to be a time-honored, throughout history truth. So
okay, I can't fix my light, but let me find this John Knox thing. Okay, there's a whole thing here.
Also, men being like religiously massively conservative while also violating the rules of their religion at the same time in excessive ways is also a time-honored historical tradition.
Oh, but that doesn't happen anymore.
Okay, so John Knox, the key stuff in here about him, which is relevant to the Lymond books, Protestant preacher. He led a lot of the Protestant Reformation in Scotland by determining that it needed the support of the nobility, not just the lesser gentry. So we see that manifesting here, where he's gotten members of the nobility on board. This whole thing is basically kind of summarizing what we hear in the chapter as well, which is all about how the Scottish Reformation and Calvinism was also aligned with Scottish nationalism and independence. It became like a way of distinguishing themselves from the French. A religious separateness from the French was part of this Scottish Calvinist identity. Knox was advocating for a revolution, but because Marie de Guise was tolerant of Calvinism, he didn't really have like the fire to start a revolution. But as things change, that I guess gets harder because this cracks me up. Knox had a particular talent for alienating the female rulers of his day. The publication of his tract, The First Blast of the Trumpet Against the Monstrous Regiment of Women, angered Queen Elizabeth and lost him much political support. Its publication, I wonder why. Its publication coincided with Marie de Guise's repression of her recalcitrant Protestant subjects. Despite the inclusion of the Protestant commissioners in the wedding negotiations, the marriage of Mary, Queen of Scots, to the Dauphin meant that the religious orthodoxy would be upheld in Scotland by more French troops if necessary, at the expense of the reformers' political and religious ambition. The moderates who'd advocated for peaceful reform were bitterly disappointed that the Queen Dowager no longer needed their support. Civil war seemed inevitable as zealots like Knox were now ascendant. And then it goes on to a bunch of stuff that happens after the book. But But yeah, so you can see this brewing Catholic and Protestant battle tied to a nationalist Scottish versus French outsider battle.
Yep.
And he was a misogynistic, apparently.
So then we get this whole conversation, which I enjoyed. I didn't like make a lot of notes about it, but I enjoyed Lymond's like characterization here, like bit where like he had a cloudless, delectable face with its intolerable vivacity, according to James. Which, like,
well, there's a whole bunch in here. Yeah, that's really funny because he's playing this role, and so we're seeing him through this point of view that we haven't ever seen of Lymond before, where he's the Crawford boy. Yeah, the cloudless, delectable face. The young man smiled. It's just so like opposite of the Voda Bolshoya of Russia, that we've been used to hearing about.
Yeah, and just like, should I get a doublet made of this? Like the key questions of his life in this moment are fashion based.
And he's just like on the offensive to get these guys to like not take him seriously and go.
Yeah, I say to offend them. He's on the offensive to offend them in some way. Yeah.
A fair, graceful gentleman whose look of simple cogitation gave way at the sight of Lord James to a smile of open delight even simpler. And of course, we know there's nothing simple going on with Lymond ever in the history of ever, but he's a good actor.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, even when they shock him with the news of Richard's Calvinism, it just says the ravishing smile remained, although the answer delayed by a second, which of course they wouldn't have noticed.
Well, Erskine noticed because they talk about it at the end. There was one thing that we surprised him with, and it was that.
Yeah, none of this is really news to him except for that little bit.
Which is interesting. Why do you think Richard has allied with the Calvinists, and what will that mean for him and for Lymond and Scotland?
My faith in Richard's ability to navigate politics is very small. So I am curious as to why he did this and who convinced him it was a good idea. I don't know.
It certainly seems like something you would do, though, if you were Scottish and you're worried about the French getting more and more powerful and the Queen's been away so long. Kind of allying with the other Scottish nationalists would be a way of countering that. And then like the religion just goes along with the nationalism. So then you wonder like, oh, but does Richard really believe this crazy?
Yeah.
They were all religious back then, though.
Yeah. I mean, Calvinism was pretty extreme, though. So even, I don't know. I have a hard sense of understanding the context of the time. Like, I'm not sure Calvinism was the main form of Protestantism at this time, but I wonder if there were less extreme, because it's super extreme now. Like, if you look at Calvinist belief, it's like, you're like, whoa, that's a lot, But I wonder if at the time, was there like a moderate version of Protestantism floating around? I don't know.
Well, and the way that they were approaching it was kind of like as a moderate thing, right? Knox was the radical, but the nobles were like, we don't need to be officially recognized as long as we're allowed to worship privately. That's fine. And it wasn't like a huge Civil War thing yet.
It's a curious question to ponder, what we think Lymond might do and which way he would choose if he stays in France. Because this isn't a subject he can remain in the middle of. He has to pick one or the other. And we haven't seen him as an overly religious character up to this point. It doesn't seem to be a driving force in his persona or his life.
Well, yeah, because he originally said he was an atheist, but then later he revealed that he believes in God.
Mm-hmm.
Believed in God, but had learned not to pray.
Yeah. But I doubt that even in picking a side, I doubt the religious aspect of the side will be what convinces him.
True.
Like, it's not about Protestantism versus Catholicism. It's about France versus Scotland, or his family versus his wife versus his potential new wife, or like it's. I don't think the religious aspect is going to be the point. It'll be something else.
Yeah, he definitely seems like one to keep his religious stuff personal and private.
Yeah.
He's also very, very crass about pretending that the only reason he'd go back to Scotland is if he could get hold of Mid-Coulter.
Right. Which again, seeking to offend,
It's seeking to offend, but I feel like there's an interesting, like, is there a grain of truth here? Is there part of him that wishes he was the heir to Mid-Coulter? It really hurt him when he lost his title, so maybe he's playing that up because that would be a legit motivation for someone in his position, and it's something that he did struggle with, although, of course, being Lymond, he never would have seriously wanted anything bad to happen to Richard.
Yeah. But also, if Richard dies and he goes back to Mid-Coulter, there'll be like the guardian of the heir, not like Richard's son, Kevin.
Kevin, yeah, and then there's like two more now.
Yeah.
He in both cases when he talks about it, he like brings that up as like, I should have known there was no need to hurry. I forgot that I won't be the heir anyway because his brats would still inherit. And then the second time they talk about it as if the whole family was slaughtered. Then would you go back? And he's like, sure.
Yeah.
But that's the implication that he'd take over.
Yeah, maybe. I think he would. I mean, it seemed like when he thought Richard was dead, he was genuinely going to go back to like look after the kids and be an adult male presence in the house. And it didn't seem, at least from the way I read that section, it didn't seem like he was, I'm going back so I can have power in this house. It was more, I'm going back because these kids need me and it's my duty and I will care for them.
No, of course. Because
Yeah.
Richard, and he was thinking Richard was dead and he was devastated. That's all he was thinking about was helping Richard's family. That doesn't mean that there isn't a part of him that doesn't wish he was the heir. It's just that he wouldn't ever hurt. He would never want Richard hurt in order to get it.
Yeah.
And Kevin.
Yeah.
I don't think you'd want Kevin hurt to get it either. So
I think that's why that whole thing he struggles with in Queen's Play is so important, because he struggles with losing the fact that he's the heir, and it is a genuine struggle. And the fact that he sends that gift to Kevin is like a big thing of, I accept that I won't ever have it and that it's not part of my identity anymore and that it's yours and I love you anyway because you're my nephew and I love you. Yeah.
But I feel like he's been offered more power and a bigger title to stay in France than what he could have in Scotland, or even going back to Russia when he was the voivoda. That's a bigger sort of power grab than going back to Mid-Coulter would have been.
But do you think he's motivated by that? Like,
no, I don't.
Yeah.
So that's why I don't think he's motivated to be, at least anymore, he's not motivated to be the new Baron of Mid-Coulter or Earl.
I mean, I think the draw of Mid-Coulter is the family and the roots and the history and the being in the house, where he grew up and all that. It's not the position necessarily of Baron or Earl now, Earl of Mid-Coulter.
I think
go ahead.
I think you're right. It's exactly the family, because we saw in the last chapter, he couldn't imagine Mid-Coulter without Sibylla. When Sibylla was saying that she would evict herself and go away, he was like, Mid-Coulter wouldn't be Mid-Coulter without you there.
Yeah, and it's not saying that like the nobility part of it it's not nothing. Like, sure, it's part of it, but I don't think that's the ultimate draw for him.
No, I don't think it's the ultimate draw, but I do think it's a combination. It's like a home, a family, a sense of belonging, a place in the world, roots, but it's also like the ability to make a difference in the world, but not just any random part of the world you can get power in. It's the ability to make a difference in the part of the world that you care about the most. Okay, there's also an exchange that I super love here where Lord James Stewart says, if you take a ball through your breastplate tomorrow, a poor point will not preserve you from hell. No, but my breastplate would, said Crawford irritably. It's a new kind I had made in Russia. I love that.
And it's also like, anyway, who isn't going to hell? In other words, like, we're all headed there anyway, so what's your point? Yeah.
There's also just so many blasts from the past woven throughout this final book, and there's a great one here with Erskine remembering back to what he heard from the Bishop of Orkney about Lymond 10 years ago in a Scottish courtroom in the final climactic trial scene of Game of Kings, where Lymond gave that impassioned speech about nationhood. Which is a huge reminder of this part of Lymond that's core to his character that he has been suppressing and repressing ever since he met Marta.
Yeah. And there's also that moment where he says, like, his uncle could have told him, his Uncle Tom could have told him about Lymond, but he's dead now. He's like, oh.
And Tom, who kind of went through this whole thing similar as what they're experiencing of like, wow, this guy's an asshole. Oh, wait, he's like awesome.
Yeah. Wait, not an asshole. Wait, he's pretending to be an asshole.
Yeah, and then we have like this turnaround of Lymond where he just changes like his posture or his expression or something, and it suddenly becomes clear to them that he's a man trained for war, the man who had saved Paris and recovered Calais. And the way he basically says that he's been putting on this act to avoid the discourtesy, which he then has to give by being more blunt about his refusal.
Oh.
So their whole argument, by the way, is if you go back to Russia, you're going to get killed. In France, you're never going to get higher than the Guises. So why don't you come to Scotland where the sky's the limit?
Which is so funny to me because you're never going to get higher than the De Guises is like, the De Guises are super high in France. So that's not nothing. And what's he going to do in Scotland? Like, because, I mean, sure, he could get high in Scotland too in terms of power, but he's not going to be the king. So, it's just kind of just, are they saying like he could be the regent while Mary's queen of, like Mary of Scotland is queen of France, so he could somehow rule Scotland in her place? Because like that seems super suspicious because there's a whole bunch of men in that group that are not gonna want to give up that position. So it's just kind of funny. I kind of laughed at that. Like, you're never gonna rise above the De Guises is not that convincing of an argument.
And France is a richer and more powerful nation than Scotland, so
yeah.
He
could sort of be a tiny king of a whole section of France.
You do really get a sense though of the sense of urgency they have when Stuart says some of the Scottish see no future for Scotland save as a Catholic province of France. Like, this is a genuine threat on the horizon.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that they're banding together from the Scottish leadership side.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're basically about to lose their queen, right? She's going to marry the Dauphin, and she's not going to come back to Scotland. Like, she's going to eventually become the Queen of France, and then they'll be that's going to connect them forever, and Scotland will be just this kind of subsection of France. And
yeah, I mean, they did all agree to it, but I mean, they agreed to it when it was a matter of like being taken over by England.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it was far in the future.
Yeah. But like, I mean, it's quite clear like Mary has been raised by the French now, so she's not allied with Scotland the way she would have been if she had been raised in Scotland, which is what they wanted.
Yeah.
If only they could see into the future.
Any final thoughts on the exchange with the Scottish before we look at the last bit with Archie?
Well, I just think she's got another like insightful comment about modern day when she says religion in recent years has become a political sport and politicians are more skillful than honest men at extracting themselves from disasters. It's like, oh, that phrase, that sentence rings true today.
Some things, the more they change, the more they stay the same.
And the other thing I liked too was the end of this, where Erskine says, I heard what he said, but I rather think the interest will lie in what the Comte de does. So it's like, I thought that was good.
I like how he kind of shows he's a relative of Tom, or has a similar degree of insight as Tom, in the sense of not jumping to conclusions the way that James Stewart does.
Yeah.
So then Archie. I think his like the main bit here is like making sure Lymond doesn't tell the family about Marta because, you know, drama.
Yeah.
Which we've already had Philippa say, I'm sure he won't do.
Right.
Well, Sibylla knows about Marta, just not Richard.
I guess we don't know for sure that she does.
I thought Philippa said something about Marta to Sibylla. I could be misremembering.
That could happen. That could have happened.
If she did, though, she probably wasn't like, she looks exactly like Lymond. She's probably like, and we met this lady who married Jarrett.
Yeah, because that's like, that would be like, Philippa seems a little more kind than that. Like, that seems like a kind of rude thing to say to somebody. Like, hey, there's an illegitimate kid that may or may not be yours, you know, and I know about her. Archie planning to have a busy night and potentially expensive.
2 addresses.
Okay, Archie. I do love that it says man said Archie crossly, so his tone of voice is really gruff and cross. And it says his voice and his stare, as usual, were totally at odds with each other. So the way that he's looking at Lymond is really kind and affectionate, and his voice is all grumpy.
Yeah, puts up the walls to allow Lymond to let him in, let him take care of him. I mean, without Sibylla around, Lymond really needs someone to mommy him.
Yeah.
All right, shall we move on to chapter 6?
Sure.
All right, so Philippa sends her servant Selly to the Celestins monastery or religious house, which is by the Rue de la Cerasse, with the key. And this whole story about an inheritance and can they help find the house that goes with the key. And she figures, who's going to say no to a monk who comes by with a key? And she's right. Meanwhile, Lymond asks Catherine to marry him on April 25th, which is the day the divorce will go through. Philippa reveals to Austen 2 things. 1, Marta is Lymond's sister. 2, Philippa is indeed in love with Lymond, and she cannot offer passion to Austen, only mild love and kindness and friendship, but that she will marry him if he asks her again after Lymond marries Catherine. Then Selly reveals that they found the house that goes with the key. It is the Hotel de Sphere. Isabelle Rosé lives there, who's the sister of the lady Lymond met before who died. So Philippa goes there and talks to her, and she reveals that Beatrice, the Dame de Dudance's daughter, died after giving birth to Marta, and she also had a son who was born 8 years before Marta, who died at age 10. The Dame de Dutance had the key to the house because the father of Beatrice's children was the owner of the house. But then, or that's what Philippa assumes, but then we get the reveal that the house was owned by a lady. Philippa's realization that Lymond has been lying to her all along, and the sudden appearance of Leonard Bailey, which ends on a cliffhanger. Yeah. Lots going on here. So I guess we start with Philippa and Catherine, and how Philippa is so happy for Catherine that she's going to marry Lymond.
So happy.
Poor Catherine. There's a line on 373. Philippa looked up, smiling successfully, and said, blah, blah, blah. And just this, like, the fact that she has to put on this act and pretend she's happy about this and supportive when her heart is breaking.
Yeah. And this line a little later than that, where about like Catherine's the right choice for marriage, and observing Philippa saw as in a mirror all her own deepest emotions reflected as once in this many-sided glass. There must have been reflected the feelings of those other women, of Christian Stewart, of Gazelle, Kiaya Katoon, of Una, the mother of his child. It reminded her in humility that she was less to him than any of them.
I guess I wasn't aware that Philippa knew that Lymond had feelings for Christian. Unless she just sort of figured it out.
Talked about it.
Maybe they talked about it, or maybe she heard from Kate. I don't know if Lymond ever told her.
Because she was only 10 at the time, so she wouldn't have been paying too much attention to that.
Yeah.
Besides, I don't think she ever saw them together.
I can imagine she picked it up from Kate.
Mm-hmm.
That made the most sense. I really feel for Catherine. The way she has to act very proper in public, and so they go talk in private. And the way Catherine is, she keeps all the qualities of intelligence and instinctive good manners, but she can't help like talking. She can't help her enthusiasm. So this girl who's been raised to be very proper and to keep her distance, but she's just bubbling over because she's fallen in love with Lymond. And I think we as the reader can see it as like, this keeps happening to these poor innocent people, and feel bad for her. I don't know. I feel bad for her. She's so into him.
Yeah. And just this like, it was unlikely. I thought Philippa phlegmatically. I mean, it's just like that she just has this calm, not dramatic thought. Like all of her thoughts about this are not. She's just. It's kind of like there's been a couple of times in the book where she's mentioned something like, well, if someone has to suffer, it might as well be me, or if someone has to be humiliated, it might as well be me, and she just kind of calmly takes whatever punishment or negative consequence for something is. And so here she's just thinking there's no way Catherine de Alban would succeed in resisting him. So
this to me is just Philippa and Lymond having something very much in common, which is always trying to sacrifice themselves and their happiness. And that's like what they're both doing. They're both like, I will sacrifice my happiness and hook up, Catherine with Lymond and Austin with Philippa. And it's like, stop sacrificing yourselves.
Just get together.
Together.
Have a conversation where you tell the truth. Yeah, and again, Philippa, where Catherine's like, we need you, Philippa, don't leave us. And of course, that's got to be just knives to the heart. Like, she's not going to stick around. That's insane. Like, which was generous, but one had to be practical. So Philippa said, no, I'm going to leave. She's basically, that's a bad idea.
Don't forget, I'm English, by the way, like in enemy country right here. So if I'm not connected to Lymond anymore, I'm sure as heck not staying in France.
Yeah.
But also, like, Catherine, there's this bit earlier about how Catherine doesn't have very many friends, and it took a lot for her to let Philippa in. Like, they really do have a good connection. So, like, I just feel bad for Catherine, like, because none of this is her fault. She's got this person who she thinks is her friend, who's actually got, an ulterior motive for befriending her. And she's got this, she's in love with this guy. She thinks she's going to marry him. And we all know that whether she does or not, it's going to be a mess.
Yeah. She's either not going to marry him or they're going to get the divorce, and then he's going to marry her. And then no, I'm really in love with Philippa is really in love with me business is all going to come out, and then he's going to divorce Catherine and marry Philippa again, which honestly is sort of how the trope goes. So I have I'm kind of thinking that's how it's going to happen, but
not even just that, but the fact that he's got severe psychological trauma, severe like mental and physical illness, suicidal all the time. Like, this is not a emotionally healthy person, and like he's not gonna get any better marrying her.
And all the people that are trying to kill him.
Wait, who's trying to kill him?
Nobody at the moment, but it's happened quite a lot in the past.
Right. I was like, wait a second, did I miss something? Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. There are definitely people, I'm sure, who are trying to kill him. They're just not front and center in the story right now.
We also have Philippa wondering if Madame La Marechale de Saint Andre had passed on the advice she'd given her, and whether, with a marriage offer in her hand, Catherine would feel secure enough to ignore it. So I guess the advice was like, Catherine shouldn't sleep with him yet, but her mom should. But I don't really.
Oh, I thought the advice was that she should try and sleep with Lymond, but because she has a marriage offer in hand, she doesn't have to do that. Like,
No, I thought the advice was that not to sleep with Lymond, because Phil was wondering if Catherine's gonna ignore it now that she's got the marriage offer and sleep with Lymond.
oh, I was thinking it the opposite way, because didn't the Marechal, didn't she say something about like getting pregnant or something earlier?
I thought that was Catherine de Medici.
There was some talk about like
Dorothy was the one like, you should get her pregnant.
Yeah.
And she'll have to marry you and give you lots of money.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, you're probably right. It probably is the other way around.
Yeah, I think the thing with the Marshal was like, he needs to get laid, but like it shouldn't be with Catherine yet. I don't know. This whole plot was cool.
Or me. Should be with me again.
The whole slept with both her parents thing is just weird enough. Like,
and Catherine has no idea. Just, this is why I feel so bad for her.
Yeah.
She's a pawn. Yeah, and Philippa returning Catherine's kiss with warmth but no candor. She knew her desire and had just killed it. There's no reason why anyone but herself should burn on them, with them being this metaphor thing that she's saying about. But yeah.
And then she goes to see Austin.
Oh gosh.
Who comes out looking pretty good in that conversation, I thought. Like, I was thinking earlier that Austin might turn into a terrible person after this whole enjoying killing people in the battle thing, but at least in this conversation, he seems to come off.
I was going to say, there's plenty of book left.
There's plenty of book left, but
we do have some indication he's a little traumatized by the experience. He's pale and sleepless. He's watched his country Rollo, blah blah blah.
He spilled the wine.
Yeah, well, the spilling the wine is very like directly triggered by her, like, Mr. Crawford is going to marry Catherine Alvin.
Right, but he's not like he's not physically stable enough. And it was interesting in this, like, Mr. Crawford himself asking leave to marry Catherine d'Alban, and he knocks this glass of wine over, and it's kind of like, is he glad? Like, it seems like that's good news, right?
Yeah, that's like the opening for him to marry Philippa. That's why they start talking about that.
So, and then we get this whole, like, he's super stressed and starts crying. And wow.
He's been through a rough time. His uncle and him just lost the war, basically, and got caught. He's in enemy territory. And then just last night or 2 nights ago, however long it was ago, he witnessed the woman he was in love with get sort of, the whole situation with Marta, where she's like, you two love each other, be together.
Yeah, he must be tormented by this idea of, like, is Philippa really in love with Lymond?
And he's about to get his answer.
Yeah. I like how Philippa is thinking of Lymond even in this moment when Austin is crying because of her, and she thinks another man had wept long ago all through a cold Turkish night, but not for her sake. So here she's got this good man crying for her, and she can't stop thinking about the man who cried but not for her. the spilled wine dripping from the table edge, I love as like a, it's pretty obvious, but like a metaphor for the words they say can't ever be taken back here. And when she tells him that she's in love with someone else and she will never feel the passion for him, like you can't ever take that back. That will, if they do get married, would affect their marriage for their entire lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Although many a romance novel has been written where this is the beginning of the marriage, and then there's a whole book of falling passionately in love with each other. So,
well, and even Austen is like, I am bound to say you may be mistaken.
right, like there's definitely like 5 years down the road. I mean, we know obviously she's in love with Lymond forever. You never know.
Yeah, I mean, it is hard to like know how seriously to take it because Philip and Lymond are pretty serious people, and when they're both like, "This is the one for me, the only one ever," like pretty serious. But at the same time, like neither is known for their like extreme self awareness. Lymond certainly isn't, and Philip is very young.
And it also partially is probably based on like, do you believe that is true? Like, I don't believe in soulmates. Like, I don't believe that there's one perfect person out there for you, and if you miss that person, you're lost forever. Like, I just don't think that's true. So I think like if Lymond died or something, like Philippa could absolutely fall in love with someone else and have a lovely rich life, and like be fine.
I think it depends on the individual, though. I think there are definitely also people that just like really imprint on one person, and once that is lost, they can never really love anyone the same way again. I think it just super depends on the person and on how old they are when it happens.
Yeah. That's true.
I did love the bit where when she reveals that she's in love with Lymond, Austen is so empathetic. She was expecting distress, disbelief, alarm, and anger, but what she gets is understanding and compassion because Austen also knows what it's like to be in love with someone who doesn't love you back.
Yeah. And this whole way that she characterizes her relationship with Lymond, where she says, "I have met unsuitably, hopelessly, and too young, the only human being I wish to belong to, but I never will belong to him, but that anyone wishing to marry me should know that fact." Yeah.
Yeah, I think I also struggle with like the how much do I believe this because it's just like a genre trope versus do I believe this because like it's who Philippa is? Because like as a genre trope, it could be true. Probably more so than it would be for like a real person who in most cases could find love after 20.
Yeah. I mean, Philippa is super, super loyal, but at the same time, she's also super, super practical. So,
yeah. But even this, she's very, very practical about it. She says she can offer like friendship and whatever else, and this like some kind of what is it? Mild love and kindness and friendship. That is extremely practical. And she could very well be right. Like that there will never be a great passion between us. Like sometimes also it's not even about the other person. Like it's not about Lymond. It's just about like I know with you, Austen, no great passion.
yeah.
I don't think she would say explicitly, but I think she knows instinctively.
I like what she says where he says like you can have no wish for marriage, and she says, "Perhaps I need it more than anybody. I can live alone, but it is better to have someone else to concern oneself with, to help and be helped by. There's nothing so strong as family." And so just this idea that she knows herself well enough to know that like if she just went home and lived alone for the rest of her life, like she would just dwell on this forever. Like there's this, I can live alone, but it's better to have someone else to concern oneself with. So it's better for her if she has a family and she has people she can care for and someone that she can partner with and and fill her life with that, as opposed to pining over Lymond for the rest of her life. It's like, that's super self-aware. And also, I super admired Austen for this bit where when he asked her to marry him, he says, without approaching or moving or making any attempt to touch her, he says, will you marry me? And it's like, good for you, Austen.
There is this part in Austen that is like, she just told you she's never gonna love you the way you love her. Maybe you shouldn't marry her. Like maybe it's a little pathetic. Like maybe go find someone that can meet you on the same level.
Maybe.
It's hard though.
Maybe in the next couple weeks until the wedding, he'll realize that there is someone else, but not likely.
Yeah. They should have been trying to hook him up with Catherine, solve the
Still possible.
yeah, solve the war.
Solve the war.
Well, I guess the war's pretty over anyway. All right, so then the Rue de la Sarase and the house and Isabelle Rosé. So I have a fun story, which is that when I went on the Dunnett, whatever it was, tour of Paris in 2009, we did in fact go to the Rue de la Sarase, which is a real street in Paris, although it is much shorter now than it was then. And the descriptions that Dunnett give are based on the map of the time. So if you go to Paris now, the geography is different, but it was not a mistake. It was that the street changed. And there is a house that inspired the Hotel de Sphere, but it is not on the Rue de la Sarase. It is some other place. And perhaps we can imagine that the real house was destroyed when the street was changed or whatever. But there is a house that inspired Dunnett. And we went to that house and stood around in the courtyard and read an excerpt of the book. So that was really fun. And I didn't have time to dig up the pictures, but at some point before we finish this, I will share them.
I'll do pictures later. I had a couple of timeline questions in the middle of this that I thought were interesting. One is that on 379 at the top, it says we're just getting this kind of summary of things, and this house. So like here, Philippa had stayed, blah blah blah. The child Francis Crawford was born there. So he had learned where the old woman, blah blah blah. Renee, who with her sister Isabel had served Sibylla as a young bride, and who 11 years after Sibylla's marriage to Gavin, Lord Coulter, had witnessed the birth of Francis Crawford here in Paris, and then of his sister Eloise. So I thought it was interesting. Serve Sibylla as a young bride caught my attention because she married Gavin when she was 29. And there is no definition of young that 29 fits. Even today, like you would never call a woman who got married at 29 today a young bride, and you certainly wouldn't do it in the 1500s. So I'm like, that's super old to get married for a woman. So I'm like, that's weird. And then the other thing that I was thinking of in terms of timeline is that they mentioned the date for the boy, Beatrice's son, makes him the same age as Richard, not Lymond. They're just interesting tidbits.
Yeah, I do remember the first time I read this, I was like, somehow is that child actually Lymond, and Lymond's older than we thought he was, but that doesn't make any sense.
That doesn't make any sense.
No, I think this is proof that Lymond is definitely not Beatrice's now.
Yeah.
And that the death certificate they found for Francis Crawford is for Francis Crawford, but the Francis Crawford that was born to Beatrice and then died when he was 10. So, because Beatrice died when she gave birth to Marta, or shortly after. So there was another child. It's just he's been dead, because we assumed he died at childbirth. The assumption was that Beatrice gave birth to Francis Crawford 2 years after Marta, and then she died in childbirth there. But that's not what happened.
This kid was born 8 years before Marta, which is 10 years before Lymond, which makes him Richard's age. He and Richard were born the same year. And then this whole like Isabel serves Sibylla as a young bride thing just again makes me feel like she got married before Gavin. Because like,
although aren't we in Philippa's point of view?
I mean, maybe, but even if we're in Philippa's point of view, there's no way. Like, Philippa would still know the year. She would know that Sibylla married Gavin at 29. There's just no way that you describe a 29-year-old woman as a young bride, like, ever. It just wouldn't happen. So, unless it's a mistake on Dunnett's part, which I'm unwilling to believe. Like,
maybe she was young in her bridedom. Like she served her when she just became a bride.
no.
Just trying to figure out ways to make it work.
I don't think that makes sense. Yeah.
So then when Philippa has this realization that Lymond had lied to her all along, what's going on there?
I have question marks beside that. Like, from the beginning, he had lied to her. Like, what beginning are we talking about? Like, La Valley's beginning? like beginning of this journey in France beginning? Like, did he lie about what the sister said who died? Like, is that the beginning? That doesn't seem like a beginning. I was confused.
Yeah, me too.
Like, he lied to her all along from the beginning. He'd lied to her.
So it's in response to the reveal that a lady owns the house. What does that tell us?
Well, didn't she know that Sibylla owned the house? Didn't he tell her that?
No, because she, right before that, on the top of 382, Philippa says, the father of the 10-year-old boy and the father of Marta and the owner of this house are the same. So she thinks it's the father who owns the house.
Right.
And is then corrected that a woman owns the house, which then causes Philippa to realize that she has been lied to.
Oh, so Lymond never told her it was Sibylla's house, even though Lymond knew it was Sibylla's house.
What did he tell her? Do we know where?
He tells her about Isabel Rosette
Yeah.
when they're in the carriage on the way to the ball that the Cardinal of Lorraine throws them.
Oh, okay.
I don't know what chapter that is offhand. Probably part 1 of this section.
Okay, wait. So surely I underlined it. Okay, it's page 302 is where that starts. Let's see where.
Bottom of 300. I learned only one other thing at Flavy that is of no possible consequence. Isabel Rosette was Rene Jorda's widowed sister, and she kept house for Sibylla and her master somewhere in Paris. So he does tell her Sibylla's. But I guess he says, and her master.
Yeah, and the child Francis Crawford was born there. And as far as I'm concerned, and you are concerned, Philippa, that ends the matter. That doesn't seem worthy of he lied to me from the beginning.
Well, who was the master, the father of Sibylla's baby? She died before she could say. That's what we already know he lies to her about that.
Right.
He did say who it was.
Yeah, but does she find out? It doesn't seem like that Philippa finds out in this scene who the man is. So that's not what the lying is.
She does.
I'm confused.
Philippa does figure out. Philippa's smart. The boy who died was named Francis Crawford.
Mm-hmm.
He was the son of Beatrice.
Right.
The only way he could have ended up with the name Francis Crawford is if Francis Crawford was his father.
Hmm.
So
Okay.
Philippa is now realizing that Sibylla's lover was Francis Crawford.
Right.
And she realizes that Lymond has already realized that. And just in time for a surprise appearance by our favorite Leonard Bailey.
Oh, Bailey.
How clever of you. Clever girl.
Yeah. I just wrote, oh, yikes. Because the bottom. So that just I'm still a bit confused by this though. Like all along from the beginning, he lied to her. He didn't know this from the beginning. So I guess it depends on what beginning we're talking about. But
So I think it's super confusing too, but I think the conclusion we can draw is that the lie is that Lymond knew all along that Francis Crawford the first was involved and never told Philippa that because she had no idea. Like we've been talking about this dude forever.
right.
And Lymond has had this in the back of his mind the whole time and has never told Philippa, so she had no idea. I think that's the lie. I think the question about who his father is and who he thinks his father is still sort of ambiguous because when we're in his point of view, he still at times seems to think he's not Sibylla's. So I'm still like never quite clear what he thinks when about who his actual parents are.
Yeah. But now we know for sure that he's not Beatrice's. That he is. So do we know? Can we say for sure that he's Sibylla and Francis Crawford's at this point?
I think there's no other option at this point, considering there's two children named Francis Crawford.
Yeah.
Why would a guy name, well, first of all, why would you have a son that died and give your next son the same name as your first son that died?
Well, that makes sense to me.
Does it?
Yeah, because if you want someone to carry on your name and you chose someone to carry on your name and they die, well, then you got to do it again. So
why wouldn't he have chosen his firstborn son, Gavin, to carry the name?
Maybe didn't.
Because Gavin, it was his first son. He would have had Gavin first. Then he would have had the 10-year-old Francis Crawford that died. Then he would have had our Francis Crawford of Lymond.
Yeah. Well, maybe he wasn't the one choosing the names.
That's true. Because Honoria probably was the one that picked Gavin.
Or it was Beatrice who chose to name her son Francis Crawford and
then Sibylla
name her son. Perhaps.
I don't know. I really desperately want to know more about Francis Crawford the First, because he's either this great man that everybody fell in love with, or he's like, I'm just going to keep naming children after me.
Or keep
and one of them lives.
My son's wife, which seems like a really horrible thing to do. So I'm still very curious about how, because like there's a couple of things that I'm having trouble holding in my head, which is one, I don't think Sibylla would be madly in love with a terrible person. Like from what we know of her, that seems out of character, at least a little bit. I mean, we like her. It seems weird that she would be in love with a horrible person. Somebody who would seduce their son's wife is a terrible person. So
makes me agree with you that I think Sibylla had something with him before she was with Gavin, and something happened. Like the whole theory you have that he was injured and like thought dead makes total sense.
Yeah, that's what I do. I really do think that happened. That's what happened. But then why did she marry Gavin?
No clue.
I'm so curious.
I have no clue.
That also seems like a kind of creepy thing to do. So, yeah. So
we've got quite a bit of book to figure it all out. And I have utter and absolute faith that it's all going to make perfect sense.
Yes, me too. Me too.
But it just doesn't yet.
It doesn't make sense yet.
But I think we can safely rest on our laurels now, or yours basically, because you're the one that came up with the whole grandfather as father theory.
Well, that was so funny because it was just back when I was like, I wanted Lymond. I thought it was interesting if Lymond was legitimate and Richard wasn't, but then it didn't. I could never make it work. And so I just did this super convoluted thing to make that work because I thought it would be interesting. And then it kind of worked. So who knew?
Which would mean if Lymond is legitimate, if for that to work, it would mean that Sibylla would have had to have been married to Francis the
Right.
First.
That's the only way it works. Yeah. If there is some sort of moral quandary that Lymond is going to have about does he depose his brother, which I think is a super interesting moral quandary for him to have. The only way that happens is if his mother was married to Francis the First the entire time of her marriage to Gavin. That her entire marriage to Gavin is illegitimate, which would make
Richard becomes a fanatical Calvinist and puts his whole family at risk, and Lymond has to decide whether to intervene to save the children from Richard. Sorry.
Don't tell us the plot. We want to be surprised.
Marietta flees in the night with the children.
I'm just writing fanfic now.
Into the loving arms of Dandy Hunter,
Dandy Hunter.
who's been waiting for years now.
It's true. And a Liam Rose stops by.
Oh, I miss Rowe. He would bring some nice common sense. This is a high melodrama time. Everybody's in love with somebody who doesn't love them back, or in love with someone who does love them back. But they can't be together.
Liam Rose would just sit everyone down and be like, talk to each other.
Some sense. Poor Liam Rowe. And his love of his life was Una.
Oh,
Sadness.
I wonder if he even knows Una's died.
I
imagine Lymond probably wrote him a letter.
I would hope so. I hope they've kept in correspondence over the years.
Surely.
Okay, so any predictions or hopes for what's going to happen next now that we've ended on a cliffhanger?
I mean, I'm initially very curious as to how this is going to go down with Leonard Bailey, because he's a nasty piece of work, as we figured out in the past. So I don't think Philippa is in any harm, because she's been alone in a room with him before. At least not from him, but who knows who he has working for him.
She did leave her bodyguard at home.
It's true.
Soup. So there is that.
I don't see why he'd want to hurt her.
Leonard Bailey also seems nasty from a distance. Everything it seems he's done has been long distance, writing letters and forging things and telling people secrets and all of that. And he's an old man.
Mm-hmm.
So who knows what he's got planned, but he does seem to keeping sort of doing this hands-off betrayal kind of thing. Who knows? But I want to find out some more about Francis the First, like we said again.
Mm-hmm.
I think that will clear up this huge mystery of what the hell happened. It makes no sense.
Well, the only real person that can tell us that at this point is basically Sibylla.
Yeah.
Unless we do a whole flashback chapter, which has never happened in this book, in the series. So I don't think suddenly she would switch styles like that.
I don't think we're going to go back to 1510 or 15.
Mm-mm. I mean, we'll hear about it through Sibylla's words, but
if it was the Untamed, we'd have a whole other series of
oh my god, another 6-book series.
15 chapters of
it takes place in one chapter of Checkmate.
We have 16 chapters of Lymond with Lady Lennox and
oh my god
and all of
Is that
that.
what the Niccolo Rising books are all about?
Yeah.
They're about Sibylla and Francis the First.
Well, it's back so many generations that I don't think you get much of the characters, although you get some of them. But I have not managed to get the first third of the first book. So yeah, Lymond's not in it, so I don't care.
Aww, such a good character.
All right. And then with the is Philippa gonna say yes to Austin? Is Lymond gonna marry Catherine?
No.
No.
Not going to get to that point. Something's going to happen before we get to Mary Queen of Scots' wedding, and it'll all be put on its head. I hope.
I'm saying no, but I'm saying it very. I would put zero money on this bet because it totally could happen that things play out they get divorced. Lymond marries Catherine, and then they figure it out, and then he gets divorced. I don't think Philippe is going to marry Austen, though.
I think that just gets messy if they end up marrying the counterparts. I agree with you. I think the divorce will happen, but then they'll just end up getting remarried out of love this time instead of out of duty.
Yeah.
But if he gets married to Catherine and she gets married to Austen, then that gets really confusing.
Yeah, that's convoluted. And then they have to get annulments again, and then there's that. Can you imagine that whole thing? Just go back to the Pope and be like, "Oh, sorry, Pope."
Unless they just run off together.
Again.
I mean, if they do end up getting married to their other people, then they would either have to do that or just run off together. So.
Oh my goodness, yeah, you're right. I don't think that's gonna happen.
That is assuming they get together, which they fucking better.
Oh,
my language.
I don't think Lymond's gonna risk any more bastard children, I gotta say.
Yeah.
Yeah. If they don't get together, I have no words.
Everybody tells us to keep reading, so that better be something that happens.
I cannot. If they do not get together at the end of the series, I cannot. One thing that I do think, though, is that I think something terrible is going to happen before the end of the book. I do think that we're going to, like, somebody we really care about is going to die, or there's going to be some sort of huge betrayal of something, or, I mean, like, Sibylla could die. She's kind of...
Richard
could die. There's sort of a little foreshadowing that could happen since there's already been that news.
Lymond.
Marta or Jarrett could die. Archie could die. Like, I mean, like, you know, like these people that we really care about. I feel like we're going to lose one or more of them before the end of the book because it would just be out of character for this book to not be miserable.
The fictional characters. Because as far as the real ones go, I think the only ones that I know are going to die and soon is Queen Mary and the Dauphin. So, but I don't know if the book will take that long.
Oh, right. Mary of England. Yeah.
Not Mary Queen of Scots. She's quite a ways away.
Mary of England is going to die pretty soon. And I think the Dauphin dies like 2 years after they get married. Pretty soon.
Yeah, I don't see this book being another 2 years long. So.
Yeah.
Why do you think tragedy's coming? Just because Dunnett's sadistic, or is it?
Yeah, just because sadistic. Yeah, no, I don't have any narrative reason for thinking tragedy's coming, except that we're only halfway through the book, and I think that Dunnett has shown herself to, if books past are a roadmap for books future, I think something really terrible will happen. And I just think it would be out of character for the author to give us the entire rest of the book. Oh yeah, by the way, the picture on the book is rather foreboding. Yeah, so I just think from experience with the first 5 books that we are in for some bad things before the end.
All right, well, on that note, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
These are good chapters. I like them. Like, they moved the story forward. We got to see some character moments. It was nice.
Yeah. One away from being done with part 3. And then it's like, we're almost there. That's so weird.
Yeah, like we're halfway through this book.
And we're over a year of book club.
Yes. We never had our 1-year anniversary party.
We still can. We'll just do it a little late. All right. Well, thank you everyone for watching and commenting. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.